Welcome back to another episode of Reflect Live, the podcast where stories come to life and hearts are opened. I'm your host, Michelle. Here in Reflect Live, we offer a platform for people from all walks of life to share their experiences, their triumphs, and their challenges. It's a space where people thrive and connections are made through the power of storytelling. And today we have something truly special in store for you. So grab your favorite beverage, find a cozy spot, and let's dive into another episode of Reflect Live. Get ready to be inspired, moved, and maybe even crack a smile or two. This is Reflect Live with Michelle.
Good morning. You've reached Reflect Live podcast, and I'm the host, Michelle Nelson, and I am here with Kyle Jestsel. How are you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing good. How are you, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's early this morning, isn't it?
It is.
It is. Well, I am so privileged to have Kyle on my show, and he's going to be touching on an emotional topic for him, and I'm just so very honored that he's sharing his story with us. And a book that he wrote, it's called Facing My Biggest Fear, 180 Days of Surviving After the Death of My Beloved Shelly. And so, Kyle, can you start from the beginning and tell us about your relationship with Shelly?
Yeah. So my wife and I, Shelly, were married for 30 years.
Okay.
And we have 6 kids, 5 boys and 1 daughter. Our daughter is a twin, and they're the youngest twins, are the 2 youngest of our kids. And so my wife and I had what we described as a top 1% happy marriage. Now, before anybody gets too out of whack on that and says, well, it sounds like you guys were just soulmates or whatever the case may be, that's really not how it works. I don't think any marriage works that way. It's always hard. There's difficulties, there's challenges, but we had worked through them. And we have, with 6 kids, we had some pretty crazy moments. All 6 are strong-willed. One of my sons is severely autistic. So there have been some real challenges in our relationship, but because we had worked together and really worked hard to create a happy, loving home, it created for us what we described as a top 1% happy marriage. And I think I've had to say, how do you quantify that? How can you say you had a top 1% happy marriage? And I would say because I said it and because my wife said it. And so that's all that matters. Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's who we are and where we came from.
Absolutely. And Kyle, what were some things that, when you were talking about that you had to work through issues and, with your kids' challenges, what are some, if some of my audience are facing the same issues and maybe struggling in their marriage, what are some things that you and your wife did?
I think one of the biggest things that we did is first of all, when you have 4 sons, we started out with 4 sons before we had our twins, and they were challenging. Some people call them challenging. Some people call them spirited. Some people call them strong-willed. Whatever you want to call them, they were crazy kids. And so a lot of times I think what can happen is because of the challenges that your kids can face, it can create conflict between husband and wife, right? And so we faced those things. I mean, my wife was the best way to describe her was she was a Southern belle. She grew up in the Dallas area, very feminine, very kind, sweet, almost reserved and quiet. And so when these crazy kids came along, she was shocked. And she's like, what the heck is going on here? It wasn't her world. And so there were some real challenges that had to be faced. And then when our 3rd son came along, he was diagnosed with severe autism. And if you've ever heard of the struggles some people have with autism, the hardest things you've ever heard are exactly what we faced with my son. He was nonverbal. He had crazy outbursts. He didn't have any line he wouldn't cross. So if he got upset, and it could be something as simple as a puzzle piece that he lost or a Lego, he might flip out and start throwing things through windows or just running through the house trying to hurt people or himself, self-harm. So all these things,
Wow.
I'm not going to go into too much detail, as much as I will say there were many times where I was with him in the emergency room because of self-harm. So you can imagine the stress that can create between a husband and wife, especially when you're nonverbal and they can't tell you what's going on. And he had limited cognitive abilities, which means you can't reason with him. And so a lot of challenges, but we at one point, it got so stressful that we had to just sit down together and say, we got to come up with a plan together to face this in a spirit of love. And we were able to design some things that allowed us to help him and to really repair our own marriage as we went through these challenges. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, so yes, thank you absolutely for sharing that. And then what inspired you to document your experiences?
Yeah, when my wife passed away, it was shocking. 10 days after she got sick, she died. And so I knew I wasn't the first person this had happened to. I knew we weren't the first family. And so as I did a lot of research, I realized that this kind of stuff can destroy families. And my twins, my youngest kids were 13 at the time. One of them was a girl. And we had worked so hard to create a happy, loving home and a happy, loving family that I was determined I am not. There's no way I'm going to let all this work go down the drain because of this tragedy. And so I mapped out a plan for each of my kids that to help them through this process. And the most important map I created was for myself, is to live. I knew she wouldn't want me to fall apart. I knew she would want me to stay strong for the kids. And so one of the things that I did was I'll call it a coping mechanism. And I started doing this the very first night was I started writing down. I sat down each night and I wrote down my thoughts and I expressed my pain and my struggle. But one of the things I think really helped me through the process was each night as I wrote things down, I never left myself in pain. I said, I'm in pain, I'm struggling, this is hard as crap, but here's what I'm going to do to work through this and to live happily and to live joyfully. And so each night I would sit down and write down some of the struggles and challenges, but I would also give myself a plan to escape and move forward happily. And so that was really, I think for me, more than anything, it was a coping mechanism and a way for me to grieve without letting it become who I was, right? I didn't want it to be my identity because my kids all 6 kids needed me to be strong for them and needed me to guide them and show them by modeling how to do it. And so that's why I ended up writing, and that's really where this book came from.
Wow. And I love what you said. I did not want grief to be my identity. I think that's huge. It's a very huge statement. And it just kind of gave me goosebumps when you said that because, grief, everybody grieves differently, but grief just consumes you. And to make the statement of, putting steps into place of not letting it identify you is big. Do you mind sharing how your wife passed?
She passed from COVID during the pandemic.
COVID. Okay. Wow. Yeah. And then was she like sick at home and then she had to go to the hospital? What happened to her during this time?
She had some underlying health issues that she was struggling with prior to all this happening, but nothing that couldn't be overcome. But I think that was probably, we both got very sick at the same time. Okay. And I almost died as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening was we both got very sick and, we didn't realize it was COVID. We really didn't know what was going on, but we both got pretty sick. But I continued to be able to, the trigger point I think was when she just quit eating and quit drinking water. And that's when I remember calling 911 and having her taken to the hospital. Now, right after she passed away, I was super sick myself, like super sick. And my mom had come into town from out of town to kind of take care of me. And I remember she called. I didn't know how sick I was. Right. I'm the opposite of feminine and kind and sweet. The other side of it. I'm a fighter, and I'm like, the typical man who just doesn't go to the doctor. That's pretty much me.
Sure.
But I remember my mom was in town and she was kind of nursing me back to health. But I think she saw, in retrospect, a lot of the people that came and saw me thought I was going to die too because of the way I looked. And so I remember one night she asked me, I wasn't going to leave my kids. My wife had left and never come back. And so I remember sitting in the living room struggling, but I didn't see it that way, right? I saw it as I'm a fighter. I'll fight through this, whatever. And my mom ended up calling some doctors who came into our home and they started checking me out and they got on the phone pretty quickly and started talking. And they said, hey, we're sending an ambulance over. We need to get you to the hospital. It's a matter of life or death. And I said, you know what? I'm not leaving my kids and I'm not dying. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. I'm not leaving. I'm not dying. And they said, oh, we got to get you over to the hospital. And I said, I don't get me what you need right here. I'm not leaving my kids. My kids just lost their mom. Not happening.
Yeah.
And I recall very quickly, people coming to my rescue and really nursing me back to health. But ultimately, I realized pretty quickly, and I remember there were nights, and I had a pretty bad case of COVID, and I didn't really want to go to sleep anymore because every time I would lay down to rest, I would just sweat profusely and I would soak. my clothes and everything I was in. And I remember it became frustrating to me. I didn't want to sleep, but I had to sleep,
Mhm.
And so I thought, you know what, I've got to reframe this somehow so that it becomes and this is going to sound so silly, but I think when you're in dire situations, you take dire steps, right? And
Sure.
I
Yeah.
remember deciding one night, you know what, fever is just my body fighting off this disease, right? And it's
Mhm.
like, if I imagine, an army of white blood cells attacking disease, then obviously that's going to create heat in my body. So sweating is okay, right? So every night, what I would do is I'd put a stack of clothes and a stack of blankets next to me, and I would wake up every
Mhm.
hour and a half or so just soaked, and I would strip down and change my clothes, and I would put on
Mhm.
new clothes, and I would lay back, get new blankets, and I would throw everything off the couch and just redo it all night long, right? And then I would lay there and think, okay, the white blood cells are fighting off this disease. And I imagined this war raging in my system, right? And every time I would wake up,
Mhm.
I'm winning the war. I'm winning the war, right? And
Good for you.
I remember one night I was sitting up. I just woke up and I was shivering. I was soaking wet and I was just wrapped up, sitting up in a blanket. And my mom came downstairs. She was staying upstairs in my room, and she saw me sitting on the couch at, I don't know, 3 a.m. in the morning, just shivering. And probably like on the edge of death. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm winning the war. This is good. I'm winning this war, right?" And I had this spirit about
Good.
me. And she just started laughing, and she said,
Mm.
"Well, I don't know what you're doing, but you're killing me with this stuff. I'm not sure how to react to this." And I said, "I'm winning." And I was so determined, I think,
It's
to
good.
survive, that I just fought it off. But I think that mentality of knowing that my kids needed me became a
Mhm.
driving force for me in everything I did. And it really led me to make decisions that were not really about me as much, but about them.
Yeah.
And so writing my thoughts down and sharing all these stories, this is one of the stories that's in my book, because I documented all this stuff, and that's what people can see, if they decide they want to read the book. So
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, since when your wife went to the hospital, you probably couldn't because you were sick yourself, right? You couldn't go visit her, you couldn't see her.
I couldn't. I hid the fact from the doctors that I was sick.
Mhm.
So when I realized she was probably going to pass, I kind of had some intuition that she was not going to make it. I ended up going up to the hospital, and,
Mhm.
and they let me spend the last few hours with her.
Good.
So I was able to be there with her. But I
Good.
was I was pretty sneaky about the fact that I was pretty much, and
Mhm.
they probably saw it, but I think at that point they realized it was important for me to be there with her.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good that you got to. Can you share some more moments in your book that means a lot to you?
Yeah, I remember, and I don't think this is in the book, but I think this will describe a little bit of how I approached it. When she passed away in October of 2021, so she's been gone for almost 3 years now. But I remember on the first anniversary of her passing, October 25th of 2022 was coming up. And
Mhm.
when you have a tragedy like that, it's not something that you forget about, right? I mean, it's pretty
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
pretty obvious that day is coming. And my oldest son is married, and he lives with his wife away from us. And I remember as we were approaching that day, my son called me, and he's, I'm grateful that my kids also were a big part of helping me. They were watching out for me specifically, but he called me and he said, "Dad, you know what's coming up, right?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I know what's coming up. I mean, we were married for 30
Yeah.
years. I'm pretty aware that she's." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do on that day?" And I had realized through the process that I had to, as strong as I wanted to be and as solid as I wanted to be, I needed to grieve. It's not something you can just push aside and not do. And so, with a smile on my face, and we were talking on the phone, I said, "Well, I think I'll just dive into the depths of hell that day." And I
Mm.
smiled about it, but I don't think he took it the way I said it, because I said it in a spirit of a little bit of jest, but
Mhm.
also realizing that I probably would have a tough day, right?
Mhm.
And I heard him get a little choked up, and he said to me, "You're coming back, right?"
Oh
And and
goodness.
it, and I thought, "Oh shoot,
Yeah.
I've put him in a position where." And I said, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah." I said, I didn't mean to say it in that way, but that is a reality,
Mhm.
right? That is the day I'll be diving into the depths
Mhm.
of hell. But
Yeah.
I'm taking a lifeline, and I
Mhm.
believe in divinity, and I believe that I
Mhm.
always have a lifeline to reach onto and hold on to tight. And so I told him that. I said, "But you know what? If you want to call me at about 4 o'clock, that'd probably be a good idea too." And so, I allowed him to be a part of my lifeline as well. But the idea, he needed to know that there are times where I'm absolutely gonna suffer. And I used to think that, pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And I realized that's not really true for me anymore. There are moments where I'm just going to suffer. I mean, it's hard. And there are moments where
Yeah.
I just need to allow to face that storm. And the strength of that storm is going to be overwhelming sometimes. And I've got to have my lifelines, but I also need to realize that will come. I just have decided I want to choose when it is. I don't want to fall apart in front of the world. I'm going to take myself in a private place and face those demons and face that challenge on my own. And that's just who I am and what I am personally capable of, but also realizing I cannot do it alone. I've always got the lifeline of God to reach out to and hang on too tight, right? So that I don't fall too deep into those depths.
Absolutely. Were you ever mad at God?
Yeah, I remember, yeah, I was really mad at God.
Yeah.
I really feel grateful. I feel like I was prepared for this in some way because some of the things that my wife and I had done together to learn how to manage our crazy kids was we had taught ourselves to be very conscious of our thoughts, right? And not to let our thoughts run away with us. And so one of the things we had worked on together is when we have negative emotions that lead us away from good, anger and discouragement and fear and frustration, we believe are emotions that will lead us away from goodness and God. And so we would always try to catch ourselves in those moments and say, okay, I see what's going on here. I'm getting really angry or frustrated. What emotion can I focus on that'll lead me towards goodness? Because we had to stay in a good spirit to be good parents for our kids. And that was one of our goals, was to really create a happy, loving home where we managed our emotions. A lot of parents, I think, they want their kids to manage their emotions, but they don't manage their own emotions as parents. And so we realized that we had to model that for them. So I remember one night I couldn't go to my room after my wife passed away. I mean, I just couldn't even, I could barely walk in there. I would go in there, take a shower and get out because everything in there was her. And it was just really painful. I mean, the room was pink. I mean, my bedroom was pink, right? I mean, it's kind of hard. It was hard to face.
Right.
And I knew eventually I would have to. So after, I don't know, maybe a month or so of sleeping on the couch and barely even going into my room, I decided one night I got to go in there. I've got to face this storm. And so I got myself ramped up, and I went up there. And one of the things that my wife and I had done for 30 years is we had prayed together. And we had kneeled together at the end of our bed and we would pray together. And we knew the power of that and how involving God in our relationship and was helpful for us, right? And so, I went into my room and with all my courage up, I've got bad knees. I've had some knee injuries over time. So I have a pillow that's underneath the end of my bed that I slid out and I would kneel on to pray with my wife. And the minute I started praying, I just got furious. And I thought, I've been praying for 30 years with my wife to you, God. How could you do this? How could you take her away? Did we not try? I mean, I've been praying for 30 years with her. I mean, we've been talking to you. We've been going to church. We've been everything that we thought we were supposed to do, we've done. How could you forsake me? And I remember I just got so mad in that moment, right? And I was just furious. And there was this overwhelming rage at God for allowing this to happen. And almost within a blink of an eye, I remember catching myself and thinking, oh, you know what? I know what's going on here. The devil realizes I'm rudderless. He realizes I'm on shaky ground. And he thinks if I can ever get Kyle, now's the time, right? So I'm going to hit him with everything I've got. And I felt like, you know what? I realize what's going on now is he thinks he can get me. And I am not going to turn away from God in this moment. As angry as I am, I realize that it's his will is going to be done. And my job is not to fight with God. It's to turn to him whenever I have those struggles. And so I immediately I picked up my pillow and I decided to create a new tradition. And that was to slide the pillow around to the side of bed and pretend in that moment that Shelly was next to me. My angel Shelly was next to me praying. And it really, and I have had other moments where I felt that anger, but I also have trained myself very, very, very quickly to realize that anger is natural. It's something that's going to happen. And so there's nothing to be ashamed of when that does happen. But what I do want to do is realize that anger will lead me away from goodness and from God. And I kind of need God. I kind of need, his presence in my life. And I need my angel Shelly. And if I turn away from that and get angry or bitter or frustrated, that's going to lead me away from goodness and God and my wife. And I can't have that. And so I'm very conscious of those thoughts. I catch them early. Most of the time I catch them early, but I also am aware of when I do have those feelings, I acknowledge them very quickly. And I say, okay, I don't really want to run down the bitter or angry or discouraged path. So I create a plan
Mhm.
to address that time I have that event. I face that event so that I can manage it better. And I don't really believe
Mhm.
I'm suppressing that anger. I think I'm managing my emotions. And again, I'm going to give myself time for grief and for pain and for suffering. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it when I decide to do it, not in front of the world or being
Mhm.
angry at God or whatever the case may be. Right. So
Yeah. When you were talking about a process or a strategy, how did you get there? Because you just don't one day you're like,
yeah,
I'm gonna do like how did you teach yourself or what things that you can help an audience that are going through maybe similar situations?
we have when my kids were out of control, my wife and I
Mhm.
created a very specific series of steps we followed to create strategies. And I'm so glad you asked, because I think this was really a key to our success and happiness as a family. Was, when we get frustrated or angry or discouraged, whether it's at our kids or life or whatever the case may be, we created what we called a cost formula to create strategies so that we wouldn't be frustrated. And cost stands for, the C stands for challenge. And really, it was designed for our kids. What is the challenge we're facing with our kids? C. The O is objective. What's the long-term objective we want when we face this challenge, right? And we always want to do things in a spirit of love with our kids, but we also want to do things in a spirit of love with ourselves, right? So what is my long-term objective when I face this challenge, right? So we would write out our objective. The S is, what are we going to call the strategy name? And then the T are the tactics. A lot of times we make decisions in the heat of moments, right? When we're at our emotional heights or depths. And it's possibly the worst time to make decisions and to create patterns. And so we would take ourselves out of the emotion of it. We'd face a challenge. It'd be really hard. We'd make mistakes. We'd screw it all up. And then we would go back and pull out our cost formula and say, what's the challenge? What's the objective? What's the strategy? And what are the tactics? What are the steps we're going to take to lead us to our long-term objective? Right. And
Yeah.
so we would decide outside of the emotion, what are each step we're going to take? And you can do that without the emotion present. You can say, okay, now I have a plan. So the next time I face this challenge, I don't have to get frustrated or angry or discouraged, right? I have an objective, a long-term objective, and I know what steps I'm going to take. And so you can take those steps. And as you take those steps and remove the emotion from it, you can model the kind of behavior you want from your kids, right? When things get hard, that's when we need to work a plan that leads us to a good objective, the objective that we really want to have happen. So I'll share an experience with you that happened to me, right? And how I applied this in almost instant. And I already shared with you when I was kneeling in prayer how I've trained myself to do this, and my wife and I had done this together. And it's because of this cost formula: challenge, objective, strategy, tactics. Less than a month after my wife passed away, I found myself in Walmart trying to buy a turkey for Thanksgiving. And frankly, I had never bought a turkey before, right? My wife had done it for 30 years. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's been less than a month since my wife passed away, and I'm in a cloud. When you have a tragedy in your life, you probably know you walk around and it's surreal. You're not even you. It's an out of body experience. You're just walking around like, what the heck is going on here, right? And so I'm on the edge of emotions in that moment, and I'm struggling. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't remember being in Walmart without Shelly for 30 years. I'm by myself. What the heck is going on? And I remember looking over and seeing a cute older couple that I could tell were in love with each other. And immediately I felt rage come over me. And it was shocking to me, right? Because a cute old couple shouldn't make you angry. But I realized in that moment, I wasn't going to get to grow old with my wife. And I really wanted to. That was growing old with my wife seemed like a beautiful thing. And I could see the love they had for each other. And I don't get to experience that. And I looked down and my hands were balled into fists. And I had rage tears coming down my face. And I thought, oh no, this is not a good situation, right? This is a challenge, right? I can't go the rest of my life hating old couples that are in love. This is not appropriate, right? So all this is going through my mind. So I remember I left the basket right there in Walmart, and I walked out to my car and I sat in my car, and I just wanted to quit and go home, right? I just wanted to. It's too hard. I wanted to give up. I wanted to slide into the depths of hell, and I realized where that would take me in that moment, right? Because I'd learned to use those triggers, those anger or frustration triggers, to think through that cost formula. What's the challenge? The challenge is seeing old couples. What's my long-term? I don't want to be angry. I'd rather show them some sort of love, or maybe I can even feel their love, right? So my objective became, how can I let them uplift me when I see it? So I called my strategy the old folks strategy. And I decided my steps were going to be the tactics I decided were going to be, if I feel compelled, I'm going to walk up to them. I'm going to say, it looks like you guys are in love, and that makes me happy. Right. And so that became my new framework. That became my strategy. And so it took me a little while to actually apply it. But I'll tell you what, the minute I did, I'll never forget them towards me. And they were holding hands, and they were so cute and in love. They were a little old. And I'm kind of a large, so I know I can be imposing. So I very timidly walked up and I said, you know what? I hope it's okay for me to tell you this, but it looks like you guys are so in love, and it makes me so happy to see that. And I'm telling you, the response was that little old lady reached up and grabbed me and hugged me so tight. And she said to me, we are in love, and it is beautiful. And the little old man leaned over and said, thank you for reminding us. And when she let go of me, they were both in tears. I was in tears. And it was a beautiful, beautiful moment.
Tears. It's true.
I know. It was beautiful. And what it did for me was I got to feel their love so powerfully.
That's good.
Right. And I think it uplifted them too. And since then, I've had a chance to do it, possibly hundreds of times. I've done it so many times now, I've lost count. But now when I see a cute old couple in love, I'm excited. Right. I'm not frustrated and angry. I get to maybe, and I'm very careful, but maybe I get to walk over and just say to them, I can tell you're in love. It makes me so happy to see that. And what a difference it is being able to change, right? To say, what is my strategy going to be for facing this challenge, right? And so I think the cost formula is a very powerful formula. When you feel frustration or anger or discouragement or overwhelm, just say, what is the challenge, right? And what do I really want? I don't want to be frustrated or angry or discouraged. I'd much rather get something else out of this. So you outline what you want to get, and then just create a series of steps that might lead you there, right? And then follow those steps and watch what happens. We've done this with our kids for years. Everything from, kids that are defiant, that argue. We just created cost formulas for that. And we had a series of steps we followed. It gave our kids consistency. It gave them love in the hardest moments. And it's created a world where I have a top 1% happy family, right? My kids are always over here. We're always doing things together. We have so much fun together. And by the way, they're still challenged. They're still feral. They're still animals. They're crazy kids. But because of the way I've learned to work with them and show them love in those hard moments, we have great relationships. We have like I said, a top 1% happy family. Even after the passing of my wife, we still have that because of those strategies.
That was powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. Can you tell about your book? And I know that you said it wasn't on Amazon, but how can people read it?
So I'll send you a copy that you can post on your website. I just created a PDF out of it. One of my objectives after my wife passed away is I realized I'll never experience, I read something one time that said, for every challenge or trial or tragedy we face is the seed of equivalent or greater value, right? And so I believe that. And so one of the things that I've decided to do is if I have to suffer, I don't imagine I'll ever experience any joy in this life that is equal to that pain I've suffered. But if I nurture that seed, and one of the ways I'm nurturing that seed is by sharing my story, sharing my strategies, and maybe in some way helping other people. And so I wrote the book. I didn't ever plan on publishing it. It's very private. It's raw. There's pain and struggle in there, but you'll notice in every story I tell, I don't stop the story in the pain. I say, how am I going to face this? What am I going to do to escape this or to make this, to sow the seed of equivalent or greater value, right? What am I going to do to get something good out of this or to make this something good? And what I do now is podcast on grief and share this book for free. So I'll send you a PDF of it, and I'd love for you to share that with whoever wants to read it. I'd love people's feedback, and if whoever I can help, I just want to do that. So,
absolutely. Now, do you have your own podcast on grief?
I don't. No.
Okay. When you said podcast on grief, I just wanted to make sure that if you had your own, then I wanted to go ahead and plug that as well. So, at the end of the broadcast, I always ask my guests to leave with words of wisdom. What would be some words of wisdom for our listeners?
I think probably the greatest thing that we did that I think is great advice is I think too many people wait to they decide that they need to give themselves time to grieve before they make plans or before they take action. And I think one of the very best things we did was we took action as we grieved, right? We said, hey, because you can get so deep into grief and pain and struggle that it becomes almost, it can hamper your ability to serve yourself and others. We've all gone down that rabbit hole. And sometimes it's tough to escape, and it can become our identity. So my advice is to it's okay to grieve, and I'm not telling anybody how to grieve. Everybody grieves differently, but don't be afraid to as part of your grieving process to read about other people and study how other people have survived and thrived through these events, and go ahead and start making plans on your own as you grieve. I don't think it's a great idea to wait. I think it's a great idea to get started. It doesn't mean you're not grieving, right? It doesn't mean you're not giving it the proper time, but it'll help you avoid falling so deep into those holes that it can't become your identity, because we do know people that grief is their identity. That's difficult, right? That's a painful thing. And so, yeah, get started. It's okay to work and work a plan as you're grieving. And I think it'll help you to still be able to give back to other people and to serve other people, even as you go through that process.
Okay. Did you join support groups?
No, I'm not that kind of a guy. I prefer to do things all on my own, but I realize they're out there. One of my concerns with that for me was that there's this echo chamber sometimes, and it's almost this is the way I see it. And it's okay for other people to disagree with me, like, wholeheartedly. So I want to make that very clear. Is I saw this in the autism community when I was working in the autism community. People get together and they vent about their struggles and their pain and their suffering, and everybody does it together, and everybody thinks this is it. It is the way it is, and this is our new life. And so I was worried that if I did that, I would get sucked into the echo chamber of this is my new life. And I didn't want that. I wanted to live a life of happiness and joy. Grief is a place I'm okay to visit, but I don't want to live there, right? I want to live in a happy, joyful world. So I was a little bit cautious about getting into an echo chamber where everybody is struggling and in pain and suffering. It's not somewhere I want to live, or and I didn't know that I would be able to add in those moments. I don't know that I would be able to add anything, certainly connection, but I'm also really about escaping the pain, right? And living a joyful life is what I'm really about. So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kyle, for sharing your story. I really appreciate you coming on. Absolutely. Well,
Thank
you have
Michelle.
a blessed day.
Thank you. You too.
Hey, bye-bye.